Welcome to the Superhero of Love podcast. I am Bridget Fonger, and I wrote a book called Superhero of Love, Heal Your Broken Heart, and Then Go Save the World. My book is all about helping people love and be loved more than ever. I believe we all have a superhero of love inside of us. Yes, even you, superhero. And in this podcast, I talk to people who are all about helping us all tap into that superhero. May this episode make a difference for your heart. Let's get this party started.
So welcome, everybody. We are with Alexandra Cole, who I just last night read her book, and I was so inspired by her book. And somebody didn't show up for a podcast interview last night, and I was like, this is a miracle that this person didn't show up, because I wouldn't have asked you right now. You know, I love how stuff that doesn't work actually works, right?
Works out. It happens all the time. So it's my lucky break that he didn't show up.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So Alex asked me to do a blurb for her book, and we were just discussing the lovely Mercury retrograde. So I'm going to blame Mercury retrograde on the fact that I didn't get your PDF of your book when you sent it. And I see the email that says attached is the PDF, right? But that email, I literally never saw that email. I only saw it as you were responding to it, right? So I didn't get the PDF of your book. And then you were like, just checking in. And because the guy didn't show up, I was able to read your book in one sitting because it's that fun and that good. Obviously, I didn't do the exercises, but the book that we're talking about right now, which is totally entertaining, it's totally fun to read, and it's full of exercises for somebody who is looking to find their purpose. Alex is the co-founder of Purpose Generation, which is a millennial insights and strategy firm that helps brands deal with their consumers in a more powerful way. And she created a workshop based on the work that she does with Purpose Generation called Find Your Purpose. And this book is the baby of all of that really great work that you do. And it's my favorite thing about books is hearing stories, real life stories, and it's chock full of real life stories. So thank you for this amazing book that you are just now birthing into the world.
Well, thank you for taking the time to read it all in one sitting and your extremely kind words. It's my first foray into the publishing world. And I was actually inspired by you. I saw you a while back, as I mentioned, at an event here in Santa Barbara. And it was you and Jen Sincero speaking. And at the time, I think
not Jen Sincero, but close.
Oh,
Jen,
right.
Jen Pasteloff. Yeah.
Like I have both their books next to me. Jen Pasteloff.
Right.
And I was so inspired at the point. I think I was about halfway through the manuscript, or maybe almost done with it, and still kind of sitting on my hands and wondering what I should do and whether I should pursue this. And I'm very glad that I heard you both speak, because it very much inspired me to go through with it and pull the trigger and get an editor and do all of that fun stuff. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh my God. I think that every single person that writes a book comes to that juncture too, where you just go, does this really need to be said? It's like, there's nothing, I'm always saying that there's nothing in my book that's new, right? In fact, I stopped writing the book at one point and started writing romance novels. And I have never even read a romance novel, but I was like, I am going to try something so diametrically opposed to what I'm doing. But I needed to clean out the arteries, right? And there were so many writers at that event too. Like Santa Barbara has a beautiful community of people who have amazing stories that need to be told. And you were one of those people. So I'm super happy that you came that day.
Yeah. And I think what's cool too is now that the publishing industry is changing so much and making it more, I think, accessible to people to actually tell their stories. And because of social media and technology, I think we actually also have the potential to reach those really niche audiences that we're writing for. So even if you have, if you don't have an audience to start, or you have a very small one, at least you're so much more likely these days to kind of find your people, so to speak. And I always say, even if you impact one person with your words, it's 100% worthwhile to do so, because you have no idea how that one encounter or that one line in your book might completely, change someone's trajectory.
Maybe your next book is Find Your People. So
I know. Lots to say on that too. Although I'm always still in the process,
Let's talk about how you came to the life moment where you started Purpose Generation, because I love your story.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you had asked anyone close to me, while I was in college or any time before that, they would say that the last thing I would be is an entrepreneur, because I'm very risk averse. And so I actually grew up in the Netherlands. I was born in London, moved to the Netherlands when I was 6 and grew up there, went to a Dutch school. But fortunately, my mom had actually gone to college in the States. And so I remember visiting US colleges at age 11 or 12 and just falling in love with the whole concept of a campus and liberal arts. And so from that point onwards, I'd always kind of got it in my mind that I wanted to go to the US to study. And I arrived there, and after, a few years started thinking through, what I wanted to do. I'd always actually been very passionate about more of the nonprofit space, but specifically social entrepreneurship and using the power of capitalism to do good. And so I thought I would end up in some type of role that was related to that. However, then you realize that you're in this amazing Ivy League school, and I feel incredibly privileged and fortunate to have been there. But there's a lot of pressure to pursue specific types of jobs that are, very challenging, potentially very rewarding financially, but everyone is going into banking or consulting. And so even though a tiny part of me, or probably a large part of me, still wanted to pursue the thing that I was so passionate about, I felt I had to fall in line. And so I started interviewing for all these types of jobs in New York. And I ended up getting a job at a large management consulting firm, and starting there right after graduation. And I absolutely loved the people I was surrounded by. I mean, they were all brilliant individuals. And some of the projects were interesting, right? But I never felt that, those butterflies of excitement or passion in my belly that I wanted to go above and beyond because it thrilled me. I wanted to go above and beyond because I knew that was what would, make my manager happy and potentially get me that promotion and look really good on my resume. But it wasn't that it was bringing me any sense of joy or fulfillment.
So it's like it was coming from the outside, not from the inside. So
Exactly.
It was coming on top of you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it was at that point too that I started realizing I actually had no idea what brought me joy anymore, because as a kid, I loved musical theater. I was on stages and performing in some way, shape, or form for a lot of my youth. And as I went to college, I kind of started shutting that down because I somehow internalized that, that wasn't what was going to make me money one day. That wasn't really a respectable career for a graduate of my caliber to pursue. And so I had kind of stopped doing all the things that really brought me joy and replaced those with things that would bring me, again, like accolades and praise. And so it was around the same time that a very close friend of mine, Nellie, came back from being abroad. And we started meeting in the mornings before work and just kind of discussing all these interesting things that we were seeing, most notably all of our peers leaving these large corporate jobs to work for startups. because they felt a greater sense of purpose. They felt more ownership, but they were also starting to buy products and services from more local brands that had a story to tell, a strong mission. And we started wondering, what's going to happen to these large, iconic brands if they can't figure out how to solve this challenge? And when we looked around, we realized that the only people who were paying attention to this and potentially advising on this were, 50-plus-year-olds who, were advising based on what their kids were telling them. But really what we needed is a quote unquote millennial, which at the time was a completely new concept to people, quote unquote millennial voice to help these big brands navigate this new world order and all of these new behaviors and preferences. And so that's really what ended up inspiring the launch of Purpose Generation, our company, which helps these brands kind of build more purpose-driven products, relationships, campaigns with the next generation of consumers, which honestly right now is almost everyone, because we know everyone has now kind of caught on to that type of mentality.
Yeah, but it's cool. You were one of the first out of the gate. So it's almost like you're helping the company find their purpose in this new world order. And then funny, because it's like it's a pivot, but I understand that you're applying who you are in the world as a company versus who you are in the world as an individual, and what makes your heart sing, which is why I'm having you on the Superhero of Love podcast, because your book is so written for our hearts. It's like, in my book, I have this concept of the mighty flame and paying attention to what makes it grow and what makes it dim. And your corporate job made your mighty flame dim, and you are in the world lighting people's mighty flames. You're creating infernos basically in people's hearts. So it's so beautiful.
I love thinking about that. And yeah, so what happened was, as I was doing this work and we were having conversations with a lot of my peers and these, customers, what kept coming up was this discussion around purpose. And maybe it was because our company was called Purpose Generation, but it just dawned on me how many people were grappling with this question: what is my purpose? And I think that's also, of course, because we live in a time, of relative peace and prosperity. And so whereas our grandparents and great-grandparents, were much more focused on the task at hand and survival in a sense, we have the ability to, not wait until we're 65 to think about how we want to make an impact in the world, but start thinking about it right now. But what I realized what was missing is a clear path to get there, kind of that step-by-step roadmap to figure out and articulate what your purpose is, right? Which is so overwhelming, to articulate it, because all of these individuals felt stuck. They couldn't, not everyone can afford to leave their job and travel the world and find their purpose that way. But there weren't as many methodologies that would help people find their purpose right where they are today without making any major drastic changes. And once you've articulated that purpose, that flame, so to speak, it makes it so much easier to start making small incremental changes that can help you design your life around what matters most.
What's your number one tip that you give to people? If you meet somebody that you can tell that they're just unhappy with the state of their life, and their flame has been buried by the shoulds that you didn't fall into, right? That when you started being buried by shoulds, you said, nope, I'm out of here. I'm going to go.
It took a little while. I was buried in the shoulds for a bit.
So what's your number one thing that you tell people to do when they are in that state of mind?
So I love questions, because I feel like we all have the answers. I think that's a big thing that I've learned. It's just that sometimes we're not asking the right questions, or we've kind of completely shut ourselves off to that inner voice that's able to answer those questions. So one of the things that I would ask someone in that position is, what are you curious about? Because to me, those curiosities act as clues. And in the book, as you know, I refer to something which I call purpose triggers. And purpose triggers are kind of activities, feelings, environments that give you that heightened sense of meaning and that heightened sense of joy. And they can be really small, like some people get an enormous amount of joy with having, the perfect latte or the perfect cappuccino, right? Or they can be bigger things, like people get a lot of joy from traveling to new places or, writing, and just starting to pay attention to what these things are, and then making, I think, intentionally trying to build more of those activities into your day to day can make an enormous difference. And again, even making people aware of that question, they'll start to look around and be like, ooh, what am I curious about? Or what does bring me joy? Because what you'll find is those people that are buried in shoulds have kind of lost touch with what that even looks like and with that inner flame. And so I think the first step is starting to recognize that.
Yeah, it just popped into my head that my friend who's a Holocaust survivor, she had not really dealt with the pain from the Holocaust. And in her early 50s, she had a nervous breakdown, and her doctor led her to, and I'm talking about Trudy Strobel for anybody that hasn't heard her episode, go back in the history of the Superhero of Love podcast and look for her. I've interviewed her a couple of times. She's so amazing. But the doctor, she wasn't talking. She was kind of muted by her experience, actually. And so her doctor said, how about trying to express your stories through art? And that led her to the most extraordinary passion. And the reason she popped into my head is that she's somebody in my life, and it makes me tear up. Like, she's somebody right now, she's 80. I think she's going to be 82 or 83 in a couple of weeks. And she is working on a piece right now. It'll be like her hugest piece ever, even. Right. And she's, she has like arthritis in her hands, like it's not easy for her to move anymore. And she is so like she does this detailed embroidery, and her embroidery is so detailed that she can just do, like in one day, she can just get like a half inch by an inch is the whole day's work. Right. And this is going to be this enormous piece, and it is lighting her up.
So cool to hear, because I think honestly, for me, purpose is the kind of center intersections of your strengths or your talents, your, passions, and then your potential to contribute. And I think the first step is uncovering kind of what are those passions or curiosities, like I just talked about, and just start pursuing those. And I promise that you will find a way to use those to contribute to other people. And just hearing you talk about this woman just now, I mean, she started doing this for, more of a selfish or personal reason, right? But through the work that she's doing, she is inspiring so many people, even just yourself. And it's not necessarily about how good the art is. It's even just the fact that, at 83, she is so lit up by this that she's continuing to do it, which for you probably is a sign of like, hey, oh my gosh, I have so much time to still figure out what I want to do, dive into it, and see, look at how powerful it is to pursue those things. Even if, you don't know where it's going to lead, or even if it's not for, necessarily profit or prosperity, it's just because it makes you feel alive.
Yeah, she didn't even know that she had this God-given, she is an extraordinary artist. And actually a book is coming out on April 20th about her life and her art, because it's that extraordinary, and she's in museums and stuff now. But she dove into that. And this is kind of what I was thinking when you were talking, is that you can dive into something. She did it for therapeutic reasons, right? Like, she was led to try this out. Like, she didn't even know that this was going to be her expression. So I love how yours, you may not even know that it's a purpose trigger, right? You may not even know that it's going to bring you joy, but just jump. Like, if something sparks you, like somebody mentioned something, jump toward it and dive in and see. It might be like she first started drawing, and drawing was not it. painting. Yep. She's a good drawer. She's an amazing drawer. She's an amazing painter, but that wasn't it. It was the embroidery, and it was like, pow.
Yep.
So,
and it's also good to, I think, again, this is especially important for people who have kind of lost that connection, I guess, to even to their bodies and to, those curiosities, is starting to pay attention to where you feel that ping of like, ooh, I'm excited about this, or ooh, I feel joy. Like for some people it's in their gut, for some people it's in their heart, for some people it's in their head. And it's just start, again, paying attention to this on a day-to-day basis, and you'll get better and better at recognizing that sooner and sooner, so that you don't have to spend too much time drawing before you realize, no, it's actually the embroidery piece.
Right. Knowing, so what you're saying is like awakening your senses to the triggers. Like, exactly. So when you're being triggered, your purpose is being triggered, yes. Your joy is being triggered.
Exactly.
I got so many things out of your book, and one of the things was an introduction to Howard Thurman, who I didn't know about. So tell us about Howard Thurman, and I'm going to just read this. I'm going to let you introduce him, but let me read this amazing quote, and you have a few quotes throughout the book. Do not ask what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Oh my God, I love that quote so much. The world needs people who have come alive. Okay, so tell us about Howard Thurman.
So Howard Thurman, I actually also didn't know that much about him. But he was honestly like a teacher, a professor who actually inspired many of the civil rights leaders. And I think that one of the things, he actually spoke those words at a graduation speech, which I didn't realize had also been a tradition going that far back. And he was speaking, you have to imagine, to, a whole generation of graduates. And really the message that he wanted to get across is that he talked about it as the genuine. There's a genuine inside of every single person. And that to me is kind of the same as the authentic self, right? And what he's saying is, instead of pursuing those shoulds, and instead of, just following blindly that person in front of you, or the path that's been laid out to you by your parents or your school or whatever it is, find a way to start to pay attention to that genuine, because we've all been gifted a unique set of experiences, a unique set of talents for a reason. And I fundamentally believe that as well. And I think that if we all started paying more attention to what makes us come alive, we've had a much more rich and diverse society. And we've kind of all started just, doing the same thing, because that's the thing that has been getting a lot of attention, and lost sight of ourselves. And so I love this quote, and I love that it was something that was actually, said back in the, first half of the last century, during a time, where I think a lot of people did feel ashamed for who they were, or felt limited in what they were able to pursue or do with their lives. And, despite all the progress that we've made as a society, it's still, those words are still just as valuable today as they were then.
Yeah, like imagine the world where we all are in our bliss, because we are fully come alive, because we have found our life purpose. Yeah. Thanks to things like your book. Okay, so for the people that have blocks, like the childhood wounds, or the training that has steered them away from finding that genuine. Tell us about, you talk about blockers. So tell us about the blockers and how we can deal with those.
So there's a lot of different blockers that I cover in the book, including things like criticism or comparison. There's the imposter syndrome, which is something that I suffer from as well all the time, even in publishing this book. And then one of the big ones, obviously, is fear. And one of the tools that I've started using is kind of thinking about fear in two ways. So there's productive and unproductive fear. And fear, obviously, was extremely important. If you think of the earliest humans, we were all given this fight or flight response because it was our means of survival. And, the way we experienced fear in our bodies was actually, a way to save our lives, essentially. However, now in today's world where we're not actually, waiting for a tiger to come eat us or, neighboring tribes to burn our houses down, we still feel that same type of fear, but it is not nearly as imminent or doesn't have the same consequences. And fear is one of the biggest reasons why people don't actually step out and pursue their purpose, whether it's a fear of failure, whether it's a fear of being ridiculed, a fear of not being enough. I mean, there's so many different fears. And so when you start asking someone, well, why aren't you, let's say, painting, right? Okay. And then they give you an answer. And I say, okay, well, why? And you just keep asking why? More often than not, the ultimate answer was, well, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to be judged. I'm afraid that I'm not going to cut it. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be making enough money. And so at that point, I want you to ask yourself, is this productive fear or unproductive fear? And productive fear is the fear that will lead to you potentially saving your life. So that's when there's like an imminent life threat. Like if you, are walking home from work in a big city and it's pitch black and you're a little bit fearful, so you decide, I'm not going to wear my headphones, right? That's productive fear because that could save your life. If you're afraid because, putting yourself out there might result in, you getting a comment from someone that you don't enjoy, or you starting to paint may end up, hurting, I don't know, affecting some type of negative effect, that to me is very much unproductive fear. So I think getting really clear on, is this productive or unproductive? Productive is, someone's life is at stake here, whether it's yours or someone else's. Unproductive is basically everything else. And then
which is pretty much everything on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other one too, I really like is asking about your future self. So coming up with a name for your future self, let's say my future self name is Christina. And I will then ask myself, if I don't do this, how will my future self think about that decision? Whether it's a few months from now, or whether it's on my deathbed one day, how will I feel about not pursuing this one thing or not getting this message out in the world? So sometimes I like to think of my future self and give her a little bit of a personality and a persona. And whenever I'm kind of at that point of needing to make a decision, I ask her what she would do.
That's cool. In my book, I go backwards. It's like giving names to the little girls that got hurt who might be,
also so effective.
Yeah, to deal with the fears. I just realized when you were talking, I loved one of the examples that you had in your book of comparison was that Oprah came out with a book about finding your life purpose.
Well, in the midst of writing it, spring last year. Yeah.
Okay. I had so many moments like that. In fact, I changed the title of my book because Glenn Milton Doyle came out with Love Warrior. But you think, and you were so authentic and so wonderful. You were like, okay, well, Oprah did it. Well, I don't need to say anything. And
what am I going to say that hasn't? And it wasn't just Oprah. The book was like a summary of all the most amazing guests she's had. So you can only imagine how I was like, well, how am I ever going to top any of the wisdom that these people shared?
So, and if you're an author right now and you're hearing this, both of us had to say to ourselves at some juncture, nobody is exactly like us. Nobody has our life experience, yada, 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 and nobody is going to tell it in the exact same way. And you never know who's going to touch who.
It's so true. And for us, I think that's another thing. You and I think, oh, well, everyone reads Oprah's book.
Yeah.
That's not true either. You know, we're so steeped in this world and personal development and personal growth that to me, it seems like, well, you know, if you're going to choose between my book and Oprah's book, you're obviously going to read Oprah's book. And, you know, everyone's probably going to have read it by the time mine comes out. But you realize that is not true at all. And if our books can serve as kind of even an entry point, and then from there, they might be inspired to pick up Oprah's book or listen to her podcast or your podcast, you know, that's, you know, all the better. And I don't think there can be, you know, too many books sharing this type of information in the world too. That's another thing I needed to remind myself of.
Right. That's beautiful. Well, I am very happy that you wrote this book and that you didn't stop when you heard. This is just such a shout out. I feel like you have so many people in the Santa Barbara area that you will be inspiring, also like hands-on inspiring them to tell their stories. And that's a big passion of mine, that we all have a story. And like you just said, nobody can tell it. Nobody can tell our story exactly. And no one has our exact story. I love that what you did with your story and your transformation. And you were so young when you had this transformation. Brava, that you had this huge come to Jesus moment in your 20s.
Many more of them. I'm going to need to write, you know, at least a book every few decades to kind of talk about what I'm personally going through.
But I love that you took your transformation and you turned it into a system that helps corporations, which we need to also improve the health of corporations, as we know in our political climate, right? Like helping their health is helping us, but also helping us as individuals. And it's so beautiful. And your book is, you guys, her book is totally fun. I learned a lot of new things. I laughed out loud even at some of your stories. And I was just inspired at every turn. And it's a page turner too. So if anybody listening is in the situation of trying to find their life purpose, maybe feeling like you've been, I love your example of wearing shoes that were too small because you fell in love with the shoes and you were wearing the shoes that were too small because damn it, I'm going to wear these beautiful shoes.
I'm going to make these fit. Yeah.
It's such a good metaphor for what a lot of people do, stuffing their life purpose into a different, you know, a box that doesn't really give them a lot of bliss. So thank you for your book. Thank you for your work and congratulations. And when does the book actually, I know I got an advance copy, so tell us when it actually comes out.
The book is available for pre-order right now on www.purposeplaybook.com/book. But it will officially be available, launching on Amazon, etc., in May of this year, which is exciting. And I also just want to give you a shout out because you are an example of someone who is, you know, living on purpose. You're a superhero of love. And I think that's infectious. And, you know, I get personally so much energy from people who are clearly doing what they were meant to do. And that might change too. That's another thing. Like your purpose isn't, you know, there's not one purpose that you have. It can evolve as long as you're continuing to apply those strengths and those passions to something that in some way, shape, or form is contributing to society or the world around you.
I couldn't do all the exercises because I was just trying to read it really fast.
I'm glad you didn't, because that's a lot to put in one evening.
But I love, like, there was one exercise where you just asked a series, like a lot of the exercises are really super easy and fast actually to do. And like one of them was, you know, a series of questions like what makes you happy, what makes you full of joy, what makes you
what did you love to do as a child? Yep.
So, and those are so fun to do. And I am confirming what you said. I am living my life.
Good. I know you did all the exercises and you affirmed, yes, this is exactly what I meant to do.
It's so fun. And yet I still have issues focusing my attention on the right, you know what I'm saying? You can know that's the other thing that your book gives you, right? Like you can know what your purpose is and not be focusing on the right things most powerfully.
And one of the best things about being able to articulate your purpose is you use it as a filter. So whenever something comes up, an opportunity comes up, or a decision needs to be made, refer and I have you put it into a statement too. Refer back to that statement and ask yourself, will this opportunity, help me live in alignment with my purpose? And if the answer is no, it's so much easier to say no. And if the answer is yes, it becomes much more of a hell yes. And it helps you focus, because a lot of people are good at a lot of different things. And so you're going to get pulled into a lot of different directions just because people are like, well, you're so good at this. But just because you're good at it doesn't mean that you're passionate about it. And I think without that passion, you're not going to be able to make the impact that you could.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Alex, for coming
for having me. And thank you to the man who didn't show up to his interview.
I will pass that on. All right. Have a most beautiful, purposeful, love-filled day.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you too, superhero. Have a most wonderful, love-filled, purpose-filled day. And please go check out Alexandra Cole at purposeplaybook.com, where you can pre-order her book. If you yourself are struggling with finding your life purpose, and or you know somebody who is, maybe a recent graduate, it's such an inspiring book, but it's a great book for everybody because it gets you more focused on your bliss, on what your heart needs and wishes to propel you forward in life. So it's a true superhero of love book. Speaking of superheroes, every time you rate or review or subscribe to this podcast, it helps bring more superheroes of love into the fold. Have a good one, superhero.